Today we are going to be working on the I can statement of I can round decimals to the nearest whole number, tenth, and hundredth. As you can see, we have our place value chart. We have our ones place, the tenths place, the hundredths place, and the thousandths place. And we are going to review how to round numbers. We're going to use the rounding rule as well as use rounding on a number line. So our first number that we're going to round is 784 thousandths. And we are going to round to the nearest tenth. So first we're going to draw our number line. And our first benchmark number is, again, remember we always look at our first number that we're going to be rounding, and it's the tenths place. So we're going to have 0 whole numbers and 7 tenths. But because I have two other place values, I'm also going to fill in those place values with zeros. So I start with my 7 tenths, but I have filled my hundredths and thousandths with zeros just as a placeholder. So if I'm starting with 700 thousandths, my last benchmark is going to be 800 thousandths. Because if I start with 7, my next tenth up is 8. My midpoint would be 750 thousandths. Because midway between 700 and 800 is 750. So now I'm going to look at my whole number here, and it's 784 thousandths. So where on my number line would 784 thousandths go? Between 700 and 750, or between 750 and 800? That's right, it would go between 750 and 800. It would go about right here. So I'll put 0 and 784 thousandths right here. So since my number is on this side of my number line, I know that it will round up to the next tenth, which is 8 tenths. So 784 thousandths rounded to the nearest tenth would be 8 tenths. Or we could also say 800 thousandths if we kept our place value. If we wanted to use this same number and use a rounding rule, we would write our number, underline our place value of tenths, and looks next door. And remember, our rule is 5 or more, add 1 more, 4 or less, just ignore. So our 8 is going to tell us what to do. Is our 8 5 or more? Yep, you got it. It is. So we're going to add 1 to our tenths place. So our new rounded number is going to be 7 plus 1, which is 8. And again, I'm going to add in my other place values as zeros, just like I do with traditional rounding. So again, 784 thousandths rounded to the nearest tenth is going to be 8 tenths, or 800 thousandths. Let's try another one. Okay, let's try rounding to the nearest hundredths. So let's do 426 thousandths. And again, I'll just put my 0 placeholder in the ones place. So if I'm going to round to the nearest hundredths place, I need to start with that digit. So I have 0 ones, I still have 4 tenths, but I have 2 hundredths. And I'm going to put a 0 placeholder for my thousandths place. So I'm going to start at 420 thousandths. Remember, the 2 is the place we have to start with, and everything before it needs to stay. So we have 420 thousandths. What would be my next hundredth? So if 2 is here, over here it needs to be a 3. So 0 and 430 thousandths would be next. So my 2 went up to a 3, but as you can see, my tenths place stayed the same because I'm not changing it. So then we need to look at our midpoint. What would be halfway between 420 thousandths and 430 thousandths? Yep, 425 thousandths. So halfway between 420 and 430 is 425. So now I'm going to look right here for 426 thousandths. And where would that go? It would go about right here. So is it closer to 420 thousandths or 430 thousandths? Yep, it's closer to 430 thousandths. So 426 thousandths rounded to the nearest hundredth would be 430 thousandths. Again, if we use the rounding rule, we underline our hundredths digit and look next door, 5 or more, add 1 more. 4 or less, just ignore. So the 6 falls in the 5 or more category, which means we need to add 1 to our 2. So it would be 0 and 430 thousandths, just like we got over here. We will do one more rounding example, and this time we're going to round to the nearest whole number, or the ones place. So we're going to do 3 and 216 thousandths. So my whole number is, again, my ones place. So here's my whole number. Anything to the left of the decimal would be my whole number, but when I say whole number, I always mean the ones place. Even if it's 343 and 216 thousandths, it's always just this ones place. That's the digit we're going to be looking for. So my ones is a 3, so that's where I'm going to start. And again, I'm going to fill in all my zeros for my tenths, hundredths, and thousandths. At the end, what comes next? A 4. And in between 3 and 4 is 3.500. Kind of like in between 3,000 and 4,000 is 3,500. So then I'm going to plot my number 3 and 216 thousandths on my number line. So does the 216 come between 0 and 500, or between 500 and the next whole number? That's right, it comes between 0 and 500. The 2 would go about right here. So it would round back to 3 whole things. So again, if I'm looking at the rounding rule, I'm going to underline my whole number and look next door. 5 or more, add 1 more. 4 or less, just ignore. Since my 2 is 4 or less, I'm going to ignore and leave it a 3, which means everything after it has to go to zeros. So that is a review of rounding, but an introduction to rounding with decimals. And our I can statement again is I can round decimals to the nearest whole number, tenth, and hundredth.